Celebrating 35 years of creativity and collaboration, the Vail Dance Festival returns July 28th through August 7th with 12 thrilling performances and numerous special events, including live podcast recordings of conversations on dance, all across the beautiful Vail Valley. Don't miss the legendary Martha Graham Dance Company, LA Dance Project, Music from the Soul, Ballet X, Dance Aspen, and an all-star cast of festival artists from New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theatre, the Royal Danish Ballet, Boston Ballet, and many more. Tickets for our live podcast recordings are now available at vaildance.org/conversations-on-dance or click the link in the show notes. Tickets for festival performances are also available now at vaildance.org. See you this summer. I'm Rebecca King-Ferraro.
And I'm Michael Sean Breeden, and you're listening to Conversations on Dance.
Today we are joined by the Artistic Director of Pacific Northwest Ballet, Peter Boal. We have had the pleasure of having Peter on the podcast a handful of times in the past, but today we are happy to speak with him about his new memoir, which was released in June, Illusions of Camelot, a Memoir. Peter tells us about how he built the concept of the book, what he wanted to convey, and the experience of writing such personal essays about his life. Illusions of Camelot is now available at your local bookstore or online on Amazon. Click the link in the show notes to order now.
Peter, thank you so much for joining us bright and early today. We've had you on the podcast several times talking about your own performing career and, of course, the work you do as the artistic director at PNB. But we are excited to talk to you today about something completely different. It's your work as a writer. So I'm curious to know what your relationship was to writing as you were performing, as you were teaching, and then more recently. Like, was this something that you had always been invested in and just hadn't taken the time to pursue yet?
I think it was something that was very much in the back of my mind almost my whole life, because even in elementary school, I remember writing projects and being excited about them. I guess the first time I formally dove into writing was New York City Ballet has a wonderful program where dancers can get an education at Fordham University and work their way through college over years while they're dancing. And the first course that I ever took was a creative writing course. And I had a wonderful teacher. It was actually at the New School for Social Research, a man named Sidney Offutt. He's still alive. Sent him a copy of the book. But he selected a story of mine to read to the class and didn't identify the author. And I read it to the class, and it got a very, very strong reaction from people in the class. And it was the first time that I realized that my writing could affect people in ways that were powerful.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall what that particular story was about?
Yeah, sure. So this story was about, it's called Cindy Dorsey and the Burrs, and I did lose it, but I tried to recreate it here in the book. So it's a story about a girl on the playground with a group of boys in fourth grade and an incident that happened with her that was very violating and upsetting. And I think it was the first time that I realized that my writing was worth pursuing, or at least could affect people in very strong ways. Of course, I was 20 at the time. And now we're talking 40 years later that I finally got put pen to paper and made the story something others could read.
So interesting to think about your talking about strong reactions to your writing. And of course, as dancers, we have this kind of instant reaction right on stage. We perform, the audience claps. It's still a similar thing, right? We're doing it for an audience, but this is such a different experience. And so the book just came out, is that right? And what has that kind of been like, getting maybe more a delayed reaction or just putting it out there into space and being like, okay, now what?
Oh my God, it's so weird.
I bet.
First of all, you sit there quietly, on your own, on your laptop, writing all of this personal stuff, and only an editor reads it. And of course, the most phenomenal listener was Kelly Boal, my wife. She just read every story as it was written and encouraged me to keep going. But then you're like, I don't want to swear on your show, but you're like, oh, everybody's going to read this.
Right.
I thought of that. So anyway, here we are.
The book is very emotional. I cried several times during it. And that's something that I like. Dancing, as personal as it is, it's, you're revealing facets of yourself, but not it's in a wordless way, obviously. And then, but you're telling stories, I mean, about your father, about losing your partner to disease. Like they're things that are just really difficult for anyone to go through. But then for you to share that, not just with a loved one, someone you're confiding in, but with a very broad audience. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, I think what you can read into my family and maybe many families is let's not talk about it. Let's bottle it up. Let's brush it under the rug. Let's try to keep appearances up. Let's smile and pretend like everything's okay. And it's not a good plan, And this was, I think everybody does that. And also find me a person that hasn't had a really rough struggle with grief or with knowing someone who's ill or passes away. And I wanted to balance it with some levity in the book and some humor, but it's about loss, and it's about also grappling with addiction, either personally or with somebody that you know and love. And I knew others went through this. I knew others hadn't talked about this. And I thought maybe in this book, we tap into something that others need to cry over or address or discuss.
Right.
It could have been very easy for you maybe to just exclusively talk about your career and about ballet. And so I wonder how that came about, that you wanted to balance both, and why that felt important to you to do.
Well, it's interesting. I actually didn't want to write about ballet. I just really wanted to talk about growing up in this town and relationships to caregivers and father and family. And my editor was like, come on, you got to give us something.
Right.
And I think I had the chapter about visiting Balanchine in the hospital. I'd written that a couple of years before, so I had that one, and I didn't want to include that. But the editor, Leslie Curtis, that did such a wonderful job, she really pulled on the ballet strings and said, you have a readership that's going to want to at least know that you were a dancer, and that there was some level of integration of dance. And dance was hugely important to me. I mean, it's just hard to meld the two topics. But of course, they did cross over in different places. So I added the one chapter, I think it's called The Quaker Meeting, about Stanley Williams' class. And then a coach is about Jerome Robbins, a little bit about being a child in the Nutcracker. So it's probably about 10% about dance.
Right.
And the rest is really life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious what the process was like. Were you just writing about individual memories or stories and then kind of configuring what the order or shape the book would be later? Or did you have a clear idea of what you wanted from the get-go?
If you look back at the book, you can tell that I'm not a writer and I don't know what I'm doing, actually. It kind of added up to something interesting, but I just kept writing short stories and pulling short stories. And I don't know that I knew where the threads were and what the ultimate tapestry was at the end of the day. But I think things emerged and it developed a scaffolding all its own. And then there was a further exploration to see how we might fill that in. I didn't want those traces that run through the book. I wanted characters like an early caregiver's Mrs. Hattie, and I wanted her to come back at later chapters because I think readers would be sort of attached to her as I was. But I did think of it as like, I think I write in the back that it's like a series of mosaics, little tiles that I'm putting together, and eventually you start to see a picture.
I love that. I wonder, whenever we talk with people who are writing books, I'm always so curious of the editing process, and because it's just something that we don't experience as dancers. So what was that like? Like, how did your editor really help? I know wanted to throw in some ballet in there, but how in other ways were they helping to kind of steer you and put this like mosaic together to create this full picture?
Leslie is very attuned to the ballet and knew me well as a performer and really enjoyed the process of getting to know me better as a person. And she was just sniffing it out. She was like, you're holding back. You are not telling something. And I didn't really want to write this story. It's called Sonny von Bülow Sheets. It's about losing John Bass, that I had an early relationship with when I was at New York City Ballet. And that was during the time of AIDS. And the loss was pretty devastating, but I just, shoved it somewhere where I didn't have to deal with it and just pushed on. And a whole like chunk of myself in life, I just kept walking forward and actually dove right back into dance, which was my antidote for the grief that I was supposed to feel. But Leslie was like, there's another story you're not telling. There's another story you're not telling. And I was like, there's another story, but I'm not telling it, Leslie. And she said, yes, you are. Go home and write it. And so I was like, okay,
Right.
I'll see what I come up with. So,
I mean, just like even sitting here, like just recalling reading that story, I had to put the book down for a second. It's so devastating. But I imagine it must have felt at least somewhat cathartic to go through the process if you had been kind of pushing those memories away. Like what just for that particular story, what did you feel after you had, I guess, done your first draft, and how did you feel like it was going to affect the overall impact of the book?
yeah, I think it was kind of, I mean, suddenly these anchors drop at the end of the book. There's a story about what my family went through with my sister's pony, which doesn't sound like a powerful story, but it was really defining for our family. And with John, I think, again, I admire Kelly for sort of applauding me to just write the story and to talk about this time that I was grappling with my own sexuality. And she's been such a rock ever since. And she knew John. She was around at that time. So this isn't something that was unknown. It was just, I went right from the funeral. I flew immediately to the Kennedy Center to jump on stage at my premiere as Oberon. And I was completely under-rehearsed. I had Eve Anderson on one side telling me what to do and Sarah Leland on the other side telling me what to do when I went on stage. It just... I think that's what we do. We just keep dancing, and it's so wonderful, but sometimes you block other things out, and it was unhealthy to block it out. And so it was cathartic and helpful to go back and realize, hey, this powerful moment deserves some more attention and some more meditation. And it actually helps me move on.
Right. I mean, even just thinking of that part in the book with Eve and Sally helping you out, it's like, or when you lose your father and Stanley says like, I'm so sorry. It's I think dancers and teachers, we have a different way of showing that we care about each other, and it's not always going to be verbally. So yeah, I think it must have been a really fascinating process to, explore your own grief, but in a way that we don't typically do. So
you're so
it was
right, Michael.
Deeply moving. Yeah.
Yeah, because you knew Stanley, right? Did you? You had Stanley.
No, I miss Stanley. I was only, I think I was like 3 years after Stanley passed.
Oh, I thought you were going to say 3 years old. I was like, wait. Well,
no, I missed Stanley, but only by a few years.
Yeah. Oh my God. Stanley would have just loved you. You're exactly his type of dancer. But what Stanley would do is just, sort of let's come together silently and let's meditate. That's what we did every day with Stanley. And it was sort of, Stanley barely spoke in a class, but there's something so communicative that dancers have with audiences, with each other, that isn't verbal. And it's a beautiful thing, but you never talk it out. You exist together, move it out.
Talking about this moment in particular makes me wonder if there was something else in the book that kind of was like an aha moment to you, kind of that like processing it was very, like we're talking about cathartic. Was there something else that kind of like stood out to you as an important part of this book, part of the process?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me to write another chapter.
Yeah. Well, is there another chapter that you're interested in writing that didn't make it in? How about that?
No, fiction from here on out. I think what was interesting to me, the book was largely about my father, as you know, but I think there were so many moments of disappointment in my father. And as I wrote the book, I realized there was actually little slices of amazing parenting that shot through. And these moments when I could see how much my dad loved me and supported me. And I was so mired in like, he's drinking again, he's drunk again. But even through that, you got these like little shards of affection and clarity that were really beautiful. And even as I was reading it back, I was like, look at that. Like there's an incident on the train where there was somebody that was really following me, and it was really scary. And I was a young teenager, probably about 14 or 13 or something. And it was, somebody really approaching me in a nefarious way. And when my dad heard about it, it was the first time I ever saw him like almost violent in wanting to hurt anybody that hurt me. And though the whole thing was so upsetting, I was like, wait, that was my dad saying, I would do anything for you, including, standing in the way of the lion if I had to.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, a telling moment. It comes in different ways with people, and people that are wading through the sort of muck of addiction. It gets mired, but it's still there. And if anything, it becomes stronger because it needs to come out.
Right. The way you portray your father is just it's really moving because it is so complicated, and it's very clear that it's something that I think everyone can relate to. Maybe, not everyone has an alcoholic father, but you have a person in your life that you love and you care about, but who is deeply complicated, and it can be makes it hard for you to love them back in that way. So I think it was so relatable and just so moving. I am curious, since Rebecca kind of made this point about writing another story, but I do wonder, was there anything you had to kind of leave by the wayside because it wasn't fitting in the flow of the book, or did you write additional stories that didn't make the cut?
I think the only one that we grappled with a little bit was I did a bit of a repackaging. I wrote a story about Jerome Robbins for Dance Magazine, and I thought I could put the story in the book. And the editor kept saying it's just not reading with the rest of the book. It really feels like a separate writing project, which it was. So I did have to hack that up a little bit and go back and reapproach that one. But no, there wasn't a story that hit the cutting room floor, which was kind of nice. And if anything, I just kept adding, because I think I had 2/3 of a book when I met Leslie, and she really pulled out the rest. And I actually think there's somebody was asking, where's the story really about your relationship with your mother, and where's the one about your relationship with your sister? And so I guess I liked that it wasn't completely fleshed out. There are places where the reader can infer different relationships and fill in some gaps. I wanted dialogue to be defining, but not necessarily me spelling out exactly what relationships were. Just let those conversations define it, or people's movements, or their body language. Allow that to be part of the telling.
You mentioned that you had 3/4 of a book when you met Leslie, or when you started thinking about this. What was that process like? Like, you kind of had this idea in your mind, you started working on it. Where did you take it from there before it really became like a full-fledged project?
I wrote a lot of this book between 2013 and 2015, and I sent it to a number of editors. I'd say maybe 5 editors and publishers. And I got, as Leslie said, you got the nicest rejections. Like, people talked about, they just usually say no, but they said this story was great, and I see this, but they said it just doesn't really add up to a book, and I'm not sure that it's something that we could sell. And they said right now, it's really about politics, or it's about other issues, and it's not even a dance book, so it just doesn't fit into a category. And so I kind of forgot about it. And then I sat next to Leslie at a fundraising dinner for the Joyce, and we just got to talking, and she said, I'm an editor. And I said, oh, I wrote some stories. Can I send them to you? And then she wrote back and said, these are really worth investing in. So I needed a champion. And the other thing is, as you know, I have this other job.
Yeah, a pretty big one.
I couldn't do this full devotion to writing this book until somebody said, you have to find the time to sit down and do this.
Right.
I mean, I know Leslie personally, and I love hearing all that. It just makes total sense. She would be the one that is like, she's just tough in a kind way, though. She's just like, this is what you need to do to get it done. So I love that she was so important to the book. So then, about how long did it take you, since you do have this other very important job to also do, how long from, I guess, kind of having an idea that you might be writing a book to actual publication?
I'd say I gave Leslie, 75% of the book. And then there was the back and forth. And I think we really had a meeting of the minds as an editor and a writer. I was flattered. She said it was very clean. She says she usually doesn't receive editions that are that clean. So there wasn't a lot of going back to fix punctuation and spellings and things.
Oh, she is such a stickler for that. That's really high praise from Leslie. That's amazing.
Well, I should probably credit my assistant for many years was Doug Fullington, who's probably the cleanest writer ever in the ballet world.
Yes.
And so poor Doug was editing my writing, and I started to learn some things over the years.
Oh, that's awesome.
But I would say, aside from pulling out the other 4 or 5 stories that Leslie had, the editing process is arduous and also rewarding. And I think, you find like, what if this sentence were, and then you say, oh my God, that really resonates written a different way.
Right.
But every word is my writing. Leslie would put forward suggestions or just say, go back and see if you could say this in a different way. And I'm very pleased. It's still my voice. It doesn't feel like a ghostwriter or an editor stepped in. And I honestly wanted to do this as a writer. I didn't want to do this as somebody who saw Balanchine in the hospital and met Andy Warhol.
Right.
Like that didn't feel like a hugely rewarding. It felt like a name dropping book. I certainly name dropped in the book, but I wanted the exercise of writing, and that was what I was looking for. And I think I could have written a dance book too, but it's just not what I wanted to do.
By the time you get to the name dropping parts of the book, we've already become so attached to you and your family, and it feels very organic and very clear that that's not the central focus of the book at all.
Good. Good. Glad to hear.
Go ahead, Rebecca. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I was just going to ask if you are interested in writing more and what that might look like, and if that's already in the works.
Yeah, I am interested in writing more. I'm not sure where to dive in. I've started another book of fiction, and I don't know if that's going to be a place to go. There's issues in the world today that really bother me, and I just want to approach it in a very individual way. But anyway, we don't need to talk about issues in the world today that bother us, but I think we need to talk and we need to tell stories, and that's how we connect more deeply and also understand alternate views. And I would love everybody to take their stories and bring them forward, because we become closer by doing that. And obviously there's massive divides in our world. And when people can find those things they share and they both experienced, we grow a little closer.
That's beautiful.
Something that struck me right away in the book was your ability to recall things, some details and nuance of these memories that is so insanely specific to me, from memories where you're as young as I think 3. Is this just like a gift that you have naturally, or did you have to do research back into, I don't know, family archives or something, like finding out? I don't remember my first grade teacher's name, maybe and the way, every kid in the class. And I don't know. I was super fascinated by that. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, first of all, you gave me a compliment that you think it's all true. So, it is largely true, but I did do some piecing together. The first story is I was not yet 3 when I won this bicycle, but I did have this newspaper clipping. So I kind of built the story from that, and then my mom's memories of those moments. And some of those stories were just told in the family. So I knew the telling, and, you're not exactly sure you remember the original incident, but there was some liberties of rounding out and filling in gaps. I had some, sort of primary facts that guided the story. Obviously, I didn't remember what people said in dialogue and in conversation. So that was the fiction writing element, if you will, to fill it in. And I really enjoyed that part. I wanted to write a good story. And I had these various bases. There's a horrible story about the twins that lived next door. And the one thing I remember was being shot at point blank range in the butt in the driveway, with the BB guns. And I did build the story around that with a couple of other things. But anyway.
Right.
Well, you really had me fooled. I was like, are you just one of those people like that can like lay out an entire, it's 1979. It was May 1st. And it was a Tuesday. I was in Stanley's, there are people like that. So you definitely wrote in it with that.
I will tell you, Michael, my mom was a keeper. So I have like all the yearbooks. She has all the report cards, I have all like the postcards, I have letters, I have a lot of ballet programs, as you might imagine. But Yeah. And I had a couple of diaries that I had too. So I had some, I give you a 95% all true. So
It's good to remember if your child's ever going to write a memoir, just in case, keep everything so they can piece it all back together.
yeah. Yeah.
I think just to round us out today, what do you hope that readers will take away from this book?
Well, I think, the book it went deep. It intended to tap into some very emotional moments in my life, but I hope that people see the connection to their own lives. I think Bedford was atypical in its level of privilege, its level of working around rules and laws for some, but not for everybody. I think it's interesting to learn about communities like that because those are a lot of the power holders today that grew up like that, knowing that they could be exempt from certain things or that they had a fast pass or dad could make a call and something would just happen. And most of the world doesn't work like that. And that's a great inequity that we experience. But I think rather than taking away the inequities, which are interesting, I think the commonalities are really what I was hoping for, was especially with, difficult relationships with parents, challenged for a variety of reasons. One, what addiction does and what alcoholism can do to a family, not just to an individual, and grief. I mean, my daughter's, I'm still reading it. She's like, Dad, is anyone else going to die? I'm like, yeah, they are. So there's a lot of people that die, but we have to learn to process that. And sometimes hearing how someone else did helps move you along. So that's, I hope people see the commonalities and the shared experience and the opportunity for growth through that shared experience.
Wow, that must be a wild experience to read your dad's book like that. That must be really an amazing experience to have all that
she's
family
proud, which means a great deal to me. So
I'm sure she is.
Well, thank you so much for joining us so early. I hope that everyone goes out and buys the book. Where would you like listeners to buy the book?
Oh, I should have
somewhere in
prepared
particular.
for this.
Their local bookstore.
Well,
who are we supporting?
Sure. Yeah. There's a couple in Seattle that really stepped up to do readings for me. The first was Island Books on Mercer Island. And the other one was a really kind of iconic Seattle bookstore called Elliott Bay Books. So they've been terrific. And PNB is offering, Pacific Northwest Valley is offering it for sale through their shop. And there's a bunch of online websites, and some of them really support local bookstores as well as get your book to you fast. So.
Wonderful. We'll be sure to share a link in the show notes of this episode so that people can pick it up. Get your hands on it, people. It's wonderful. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time. It was great to chat with you about this. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you both. Really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Conversations on Dance is part of the ACAST Creator Network. For more information, visit conversationsondancepod.com.